The explosion tore through the cabin at 30,000 feet, and Nathan Brooks had exactly 4 seconds to decide whether he would die strapped to his seat or fighting for the daughter waiting for him at home. Metal screamed. Bodies flew. The Pacific Ocean rushed up like a fist. When he woke on burning wreckage, choking on smoke and salt, it wasn't his CEO who pulled him from the flames. It was Elena Vale, the woman who'd barely spoken to him in 3 years, now covered in blood and dragging him toward a beach that shouldn't exist. If you want to see how two strangers survive the impossible, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Nathan Brooks was not supposed to die on a Tuesday. He'd kissed his daughter goodbye that morning like he always did, one hand on her shoulder, the other smoothing down the stubborn cowlick she'd inherited from her mother. Ruby was 8 years old and still small enough that when she hugged him, her head fit perfectly under his chin. She smelled like strawberry shampoo and the cinnamon toast she'd barely touched at breakfast. "You'll be back Friday?" she'd asked, her voice muffled against his shirt. "Friday. I promise." It was the same promise he'd made every time he traveled for work, the same promise he'd kept for 3 years, ever since Sarah died and left him alone with a 5-year-old who cried herself to sleep for 6 months straight. Nathan had learned to build his life around that promise. No matter where the company sent him, no matter how brutal the schedule, he came home. Always. Ruby had pulled back and looked up at him with those serious brown eyes that were too old for her face. Pinky promise? He'd hooked his pinky around hers. Pinky promise. Now, 12 hours later, Nathan was staring at the ceiling of a Boeing 737 as it shook so violently he could feel his teeth rattling. The oxygen masks had dropped. People were screaming. A flight attendant was on her knees in the aisle, clutching the armrest of someone's seat, her face white as paper. The plane lurched sideways. Nathan's stomach dropped into his shoes. His laptop slid off the tray table and hit the floor. Somewhere behind him, luggage was crashing out of the overhead bins. The woman next to him, a stranger in a business suit, was sobbing into her hands, and Nathan couldn't even tell her it would be okay, because he didn't believe it himself. He thought of Ruby. He thought of her waiting at his sister's house on Friday afternoon, watching the driveway for his car. He thought of her face when he didn't show up. He thought of her learning the word crash and Pacific and no survivors all in the same breath, the way he'd learned cancer and stage 4 and 6 months when Sarah got sick. The plane dropped, not turbulence, not a bump, a full stomach-lurching fall that felt like the bottom had been ripped out of the sky. The lights went out. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting everything in a sickly red glow. Nathan grabbed the armrest so hard his knuckles went white. It wasn't loud the way he'd expected. It was a deep, bone-shaking crack that seemed to come from everywhere at once, followed by a shriek of metal tearing apart like aluminum foil. The fuselage split open 6 rows ahead of him, and suddenly there was sky where the wall should have been. Wind roared into the cabin. Papers, bags, people, everything not bolted down, started flying toward the gash in the plane's side. Nathan saw a man in a blue shirt get sucked out into nothing. He didn't scream. He just disappeared. The woman next to Nathan was screaming now, her seatbelt unbuckled, her hands clawing at his arm. He grabbed her wrist without thinking, hauling her back down into her seat, but she was hysterical, thrashing, trying to stand up even as the plane tilted forward and began its final dive. "Stay down!" Nathan shouted, but his voice was swallowed by the wind. The ocean was visible through the tear in the fuselage now, blue and endless and coming up fast. Nathan had maybe 10 seconds, maybe less. He thought about Ruby again. Her laugh, her terrible knock-knock jokes, the way she still slept with the nightlight on because she was afraid of the dark. He thought about how she'd grow up without him, how she'd forget his voice, how she'd hate him for breaking his promise. He closed his eyes. The impact was like hitting a concrete wall at 100 miles an hour. Nathan woke up to smoke and screaming. His head was ringing. His mouth tasted like blood. When he tried to open his eyes, only the left one worked. The right was crusted shut with something sticky. He was still strapped into his seat, but the seat wasn't attached to anything anymore. It was lying on its side in shallow water, half buried in sand. Sand. Nathan blinked, tried to make sense of what he was seeing. The ocean was 20 feet away, gray and churning under a sky the color of bruises. Pieces of the plane were scattered across the beach like broken toys. A wing, a section of fuselage, a chunk of the tail with the airline's logo still visible. Smoke poured from a fire somewhere behind him, thick and black and chemical-smelling. He was alive. He didn't know how, but he was alive. Nathan fumbled with his seatbelt, fingers shaking so badly it took 3 tries to get it unbuckled. When he finally staggered to his feet, pain shot up his left leg and he nearly went down again. His ankle was either sprained or broken. He couldn't tell which. His ribs screamed when he breathed. There was a gash on his forehead that was still bleeding, dripping into his eye. But he was standing. That had to count for something. "Help!" The voice came from somewhere behind him, raw and desperate. Nathan turned too fast and his vision swam, black spots dancing at the edges. He grabbed onto the side of his seat to steady himself, blinking hard until the world came back into focus. The wreckage was worse than he'd thought. The plane had broken into at least 3 pieces on impact, and the section he'd been in, business class, rows 10 through 18, had come to rest just above the waterline. The rear of the plane was half submerged in the surf, waves crashing over it with every surge. The front section was gone entirely, either sunk or scattered somewhere he couldn't see. "Help! Somebody!" Nathan followed the voice. His ankle throbbed with every step, but he forced himself to move, climbing over twisted metal and shattered plastic, past a life vest still inflated and bobbing in a tidal pool, past a carry-on bag with its contents spilled across the sand, a pink hoodie, a paperback novel, a child's stuffed elephant. He found her pinned under part of the fuselage. At first, he didn't recognize her. She was covered in soot and blood, her blonde hair matted to her skull, her face streaked with grime. But when she turned her head and looked at him, he knew. Elena Vale, his boss, the CEO of the company he'd worked for since Ruby was born. The woman who'd given exactly 1 speech at the last shareholder meeting and never once looked at him directly, even though he'd been in the room taking notes. "Wait!" Elena's hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. Her fingers were ice cold. "If you move it and something's broken, if I don't move it, you're going to bleed out or drown when the tide comes in," Nathan said flatly. "So we're doing this. Ready?" She stared at him for half a second, then nodded. 3. Nathan hauled on the metal with everything he had. His ribs screamed, his ankle buckled. For a terrible moment, nothing happened, and then the slab shifted, grinding against the sand, lifting just enough. Elena dragged herself backward, her face white, her teeth clenched so hard Nathan could hear them grinding. The moment she was clear, he let go and the metal slammed back down with a wet crunch. Elena lay on her back in the sand, gasping. Her left pant leg was shredded, soaked with blood from a gash that ran from her knee to her shin. It wasn't spurting, which meant no artery, but it was bad. Nathan could see bone. "Can you stand?" he asked. "I don't know." "Try." She rolled onto her side, then pushed herself up onto her hands and knees. Her arms were shaking. When she tried to put weight on her left leg, she made a sound like a wounded animal and collapsed. Nathan caught her before she hit the ground. For a moment, they just stayed there, her leaning against him, both of them breathing hard, both of them shy when they shouldn't be. Elena smelled like smoke and jet fuel and fear. Her hands were fisted in his shirt. "Is anyone else?" she started. "I don't know." But even as he said it, Nathan was looking around, scanning the beach. The fire was still burning somewhere in the wreckage, sending up a column of black smoke that bent sideways in the wind. He could see more seats, more debris, more luggage. He couldn't see any other people. "We need to check," Elena said. Her voice was steadier now, but only just. "There could be survivors in the water, in the other sections." Nathan wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that he could barely stand, that she was bleeding everywhere, that the odds of finding anyone alive in that mess were next to 0. But she was already pulling away from him, already trying to get to her feet again, and he found himself reaching out to steady her without thinking. "Lean on me," he said. She did. They moved slowly, painfully, back toward the wreckage. Nathan's ankle felt like it was being stabbed with every step, and Elena was limping so badly she was practically hopping, but they kept going. They checked the seats still half buried in the sand. They waded into the surf to reach the submerged section, calling out until their voices went hoarse. Nothing. No one. By the time the sun started to sink toward the horizon, Nathan had counted 18 bodies. 18 people who hadn't made it. 18 strangers he couldn't save. He and Elena dragged them above the waterline one by one, and covered them with whatever they could find: blankets from the overhead bins, seat cushions, torn pieces of fuselage. It took hours. When it was done, Nathan sat down hard on the sand and put his head in his hands. His whole body was shaking. He couldn't stop seeing the man in the blue shirt disappearing into the sky. Couldn't stop thinking about Ruby, waiting for him. Couldn't stop wondering if this island, wherever the hell they were, would be the last place he'd ever see. Elena sank down beside him. She'd torn a strip off her blouse and tied it around her leg, but it was already soaked through with blood. Her face was gray. "We're the only ones," she said quietly. "Yeah. Out of 163 passengers." Nathan didn't answer. What was there to say? They sat in silence as the sun bled out over the ocean, painting the water red and gold. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of salt water and burning plastic. Somewhere in the jungle behind them, birds were calling to each other, sharp, unfamiliar sounds that made Nathan's skin crawl. "We need water," Elena said eventually. "Shelter. A signal fire." Nathan looked at her. Her blonde hair was stiff with dried blood. Her expensive blouse was torn and filthy. She looked like she'd been through a war. But her eyes were sharp, focused, already moving to the next problem. "You're a CEO," Nathan said, "not a wilderness survival expert. Neither are you. I'm a project manager. And a dad. I know how to improvise." Elena's mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile. "Then improvise, Brooks, because if we don't find water by tomorrow, we're dead." She wasn't wrong. Nathan pushed himself to his feet, wincing as his ankle protested. The beach stretched out in both directions, littered with debris. Behind them, the jungle was a wall of green, thick, and impenetrable. Ahead, the ocean rolled on endlessly, indifferent. "We'll search the wreckage," he said. "Look for bottles, food, anything useful. Then we'll figure out where the hell we are." "And then?" "Then we survive long enough to get rescued." Elena stood up beside him, swaying slightly. "You really think someone's coming?" Nathan thought of Ruby, thought of the promise he'd made her, the one he'd kept for 3 years without fail. Thought of her face when he walked through the door on Friday, late but alive. "They have to," he said. The wreckage yielded more than Nathan had expected, but less than they needed. They found 12 bottles of water, most of them half empty. A dented first aid kit with bandages, antiseptic, and a single roll of medical tape. 3 granola bars, a bag of peanuts, and a pack of gum. A pocket knife. A lighter that still worked. A phone that didn't. Nathan tried the phone anyway, standing on the highest piece of debris he could climb, holding it up toward the sky like an offering. No signal, not even a flicker. "Told you," Elena said from below. She was sitting on a chunk of fuselage, rewrapping her leg with gauze from the first aid kit. Her hands were steady, but her face was pale. "Worth a shot." "Not really." Nathan climbed down, pocketing the useless phone. The sun was almost gone now, the sky fading from red to purple to black. The temperature was dropping fast. Out here, away from the fire, the wind cut through his torn shirt like a knife. "We need to find shelter before dark," he said. "Somewhere out of the wind." Elena gestured toward the jungle. "In there?" "You got a better idea?" She didn't. They moved inland, picking their way through the debris field until the sand gave way to scrub grass and then to the dense tangle of trees. Nathan had never been in a jungle before, didn't know what half the plants were. Some of them had leaves as big as his torso. Some of them had thorns. All of them seemed designed to trip him, scratch him, or block his path. Elena was limping worse now. Every few steps she had to stop and catch her breath, her hand pressed to her side like her ribs hurt. Nathan slowed his pace to match hers, and she shot him a look that could have stripped paint. "I don't need you to babysit me, Brooks. Didn't say you did. You're walking like I'm made of glass. You're bleeding through your bandage. If you pass out, I'm not carrying you." That shut her up. They found a spot maybe 50 yards from the beach. A small clearing ringed by trees, with a fallen log they could use for seating and enough overhead cover to block some of the wind. It wasn't much, but it was better than the open beach. Nathan gathered what dry wood he could find and built a fire using the lighter and a handful of torn pages from a paperback novel he'd pulled from the wreckage. The flames caught on the third try, weak and flickering but real. Heat spread outward, and for the first time since the crash, Nathan felt something other than cold terror. Elena sat on the log, staring into the fire. Her hands were in her lap, her shoulders hunched. She looked smaller than she had in the boardroom. Smaller and more human. "My assistant is going to have a breakdown," she said suddenly. Nathan blinked. "What?" "Rachel, my assistant. She manages my calendar down to the minute. When I don't show up for tomorrow's meeting, she's going to lose her mind." Elena's voice was flat, almost detached. "She'll call the airline. They'll tell her the plane went down. She'll cry. She never cries." Nathan didn't know what to say to that. He poked at the fire with a stick, sending up a spray of sparks. "What about you?" Elena asked. "Who's waiting for you?" "My daughter." The words came out rougher than he meant them to. Nathan cleared his throat, but it didn't help. The tightness in his chest was getting worse. "How old?" 8. Elena nodded slowly. "What's her name?" "Ruby." "Ruby," Elena repeated. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and Nathan saw something shift in her expression. "You told her you'd come back." It wasn't a question. "Yeah. And now you can't." Nathan's throat closed up. He stared at the fire, at the flames bending and twisting in the wind, and tried not to think about Ruby's face when she realized he wasn't coming home. Tried not to think about her crying herself to sleep again, the way she had after Sarah died. Tried not to think about failing her. "We'll get rescued," he said. His voice sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Someone will find us." "Sure," Elena said, but she didn't sound like she believed it. They sat in silence after that, watching the fire burn down. The jungle around them was alive with noise, chirping, buzzing, rustling sounds that Nathan couldn't identify. Every time something moved in the shadows, his heart kicked up a notch. Every time the wind shifted, he smelled smoke and thought the wreckage was burning again. He didn't sleep, neither did Elena. When the sun finally crept over the horizon, turning the sky from black to gray to pale gold, Nathan stood up and looked out toward the beach. The wreckage was still there, half buried in the sand. The bodies were still there, covered in their makeshift shrouds. The ocean was still there, endless and empty. No rescue boats, no helicopters, no planes, nothing. Elena stood beside him, her arms wrapped around herself. Her leg had bled through the bandage again, leaving a dark stain on her torn pants. "So what now?" she asked. Nathan thought about Ruby, thought about the promise he'd made her, thought about the fact that he was alive, which meant he still had a chance to keep it. "Now we figure out how to stay alive," he said, "and we don't stop until someone finds us." Elena looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "All right, Brooks," she said, "let's get to work." The first full day on the island taught Nathan two things. Survival was methodical work, and Elena Vale had no idea how to stop being a CEO. They started by cataloging everything salvageable from the wreckage. Elena insisted on making a list. Actual pen and paper she'd found in someone's carry-on, writing in neat columns like they were taking inventory at a warehouse instead of scavenging through a graveyard. Nathan didn't argue. If organizing debris helped her stay sane, fine. He had his own way of coping, which mostly involved not thinking about Ruby for more than 30 seconds at a time, or he'd lose it completely. 16 bottles of water, Elena said, her voice clipped and professional. Most are half empty, maybe 2 gallons total. That'll last us 3 days if we're careful. We need to find a freshwater source before then. Nathan looked up from the pile of seat cushions he was pulling apart for foam. You think there's one on this island? There has to be. It's big enough. I saw hills when we were coming down. Elena paused, her pen hovering over the paper. Assuming I wasn't hallucinating. You weren't. I saw them too. She made a note. Her hand was shaking slightly, but her face stayed blank. Nathan wondered how long she could keep that up, the whole Ice Queen routine, before the cracks started showing. He'd seen her trap herself under that fuselage, seen the raw panic in her eyes when she thought she was going to die there. But now, 12 hours later, she was back to acting like emotions were a waste of time. Nathan had worked for her company for 3 years and never once saw her smile. Food, Elena continued. 3 granola bars, 1 bag of peanuts, half a package of crackers, and something that might have been a sandwich before it got soaked in seawater. Coconuts, Nathan added. Saw at least a dozen on the trees near the beach. Can you climb? Not with this ankle. Elena glanced at his foot. He'd wrapped it as tight as he could with strips torn from a shirt. but it was swollen to twice its normal size and turning purple. Walking on it felt like stepping on broken glass. "I'll try," she said. "With your leg? You have a better idea?" Nathan didn't. That was the problem. Neither of them was in any shape to be doing this, but the alternative was sitting around waiting to die. And he hadn't survived a plane crash just to give up now. They worked through the morning, dragging useful items away from the wreckage and stacking them in the clearing they'd slept in. Luggage yielded clothes they could use for bandages or shelter. A shattered cosmetics case gave them a small mirror, useless for vanity, but Nathan pocketed it anyway. Mirrors could signal planes. The first aid kit was better stocked than he'd thought. More bandages, antibiotic ointment, pain pills that were probably expired but better than nothing, and a pair of tweezers. Elena found a multi-tool buried in the sand near one of the seats. It had a knife, pliers, a saw blade, and a can opener. She held it up like a trophy. "This is good," she said. "Yeah." Nathan took it from her, testing the blade, still sharp. "This is real good." By noon, the heat was unbearable. The sun beat down on the beach like a hammer, and there was no shade except under the wing section that had come to rest near the waterline. Nathan's shirt was soaked through with sweat. His head was pounding from dehydration, and every time he bent over, his vision went spotty. Elena looked worse. Her face was flushed, her eyes glassy. The makeshift bandage on her leg was filthy, crusted with dried blood and sand. Nathan had tried to clean it that morning with some of their precious water and the antiseptic from the first aid kit, but the gash was deep and angry-looking, the edges swollen. "We need to get you out of the sun," Nathan said. "I'm fine." "You're not. Sit down before you pass out." For once, she didn't argue. She sank down onto a seat cushion in the shade of the wing, her back against the twisted metal, and closed her eyes. Nathan handed her one of the water bottles. "Small sips," he said. "Make it last." She drank, then passed it back. "We should ration everything. Half a bottle per person per day, until we find more." "That's not enough." "It's what we have." Nathan screwed the cap back on, frustrated. She wasn't wrong, but that didn't make it easier. Half a bottle a day in this heat would leave them weak, sluggish, vulnerable. They needed to find fresh water soon, or this whole survival plan would fall apart before it even started. "I'm going to scout inland," he said. "See if I can find a stream or a spring." Elena opened her eyes. "Not alone. You can barely walk." "Neither can you." "I can walk better than you." "That's not saying much." She pushed herself upright, wincing. "If you go alone and something happens, if you fall, if you get lost, I won't be able to come find you. We stick together." Nathan wanted to argue, but the logic was sound. He hated it, but it was sound. "Fine," he said, "but we're taking it slow." "Slow is all I've got right now, Brooks." They moved into the jungle just after midday, leaving the beach and the wreckage behind. The transition was abrupt. One moment they were walking on sand, and the next they were swallowed by green. The canopy overhead blocked out most of the sunlight, turning the world dim and humid. Vines hung from the trees like ropes. The undergrowth was so thick Nathan had to hack through it with the multi-tool, clearing a path one stubborn branch at a time. Elena followed behind him, one hand braced against a tree for balance. She didn't complain, but Nathan could hear her breathing, shallow and labored, like every step cost her. "You okay?" he asked without turning around. "Fantastic." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you're getting." They kept going. The jungle was alive with sound, birds screeching overhead, insects buzzing in thick clouds, things rustling in the bushes that Nathan didn't want to think about too hard. The air smelled like rotting vegetation and wet earth. His ankle throbbed with every step, sending jolts of pain up his leg, but he gritted his teeth and pushed forward. After an hour, they found water. It wasn't much, just a thin trickle running down a cluster of rocks, pooling in a shallow basin before disappearing into the ground. But it was clear, and when Nathan cupped his hands under the flow and tasted it, it didn't have the salt tang of the ocean. "Fresh," he said, relief flooding through him. Elena dropped to her knees beside the pool, ignoring the mud soaking into her torn pants. She drank straight from her hands, gulping it down like she hadn't had water in days. When she finally sat back, there were tears on her face. Nathan pretended not to notice. "We can use this," he said, keeping his voice even. "Fill our bottles, bring them back to camp. It's not close, but it's doable." "We should move camp here," Elena said, "closer to the water." Nathan considered it. She was right. Hauling water back and forth from the beach would waste energy they didn't have. But the thought of leaving the wreckage behind, of giving up their position near the crash site, made his chest tighten. If a rescue team came looking, they'd search the coast first. If they were inland, hidden under the jungle canopy, would anyone even see them? "We need to stay visible," he said, "for rescuers." "There are no rescuers." The words hung in the air between them, cold and flat. Nathan stared at her. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." Elena's voice didn't waver. "The black box is at the bottom of the ocean. The plane broke apart in midair. Even if someone saw us go down, they don't know where to look. The Pacific is massive, Brooks. We're not getting rescued." "So what? We just give up?" "I didn't say that." She stood, brushing mud off her knees. "I said we're not getting rescued. That means we have to rescue ourselves." Nathan opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. Because as much as he hated hearing it, part of him knew she was right. They'd been here almost 24 hours, and there hadn't been a single plane overhead. No boats on the horizon, no sound of helicopters. If help was coming, it should have been here by now. But he thought of Ruby again. Her face, her voice, the way she'd looked at him when he promised to come home. And he couldn't let go. Not yet. "We'll keep the camp on the beach," he said firmly. "Build a signal fire, stay visible, but we'll make trips here for water." Elena looked like she wanted to argue, but she just nodded. "Fine." They filled the bottles and headed back. The walk took longer on the return trip. Elena was limping so badly she had to stop every few minutes, leaning against trees and breathing hard. Nathan offered to carry her twice, and both times she told him to go to hell. By the time they made it back to the clearing, the sun was starting to sink, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Nathan built up the fire while Elena sat on the log, redressing her leg with fresh bandages. The wound looked worse, red and inflamed, with streaks of color spreading outward from the edges. Infection. Nathan didn't say it out loud, but he could see it in her face. She knew. "We need to keep it clean," he said, crouching beside her. "Change the bandage twice a day. Use the antibiotic ointment." "I know." "If it gets worse—" "I know, Brooks." Her voice was sharp. "I'm not an idiot." "Didn't say you were." She looked at him then, her jaw tight. For a moment, Nathan thought she was going to snap at him again, but instead she just let out a long breath and looked away. "Sorry," she said quietly. This isn't my strong suit." "What? Being stranded on a deserted island?" "Being helpless." Nathan sat back on his heels. "You're not helpless. You dragged me out of a burning plane. That was adrenaline. This is different." Elena gestured vaguely at the jungle, the fire, the whole impossible situation. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to survive without a plan, without control, without—" She stopped, shaking her head. "Forget it." "Without what?" "Without knowing the outcome," she said finally. "I've spent my entire life building things, managing risks, controlling variables, and now I'm stuck on an island with no phone, no team, no idea if we're going to make it past next week. I hate it." Nathan didn't know what to say to that. He'd never thought about Elena Vale as a person before, just as the name at the top of the company directory, the signature on his paychecks. But sitting here in the firelight, watching her struggle to tie a bandage with shaking hands, she looked less like a CEO and more like someone who was terrified and trying not to show it. "We'll figure it out," Nathan said. "One day at a time." Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You really believe that?" "I have to." She nodded slowly, like she understood, and maybe she did. That night they ate one granola bar between them and tried not to think about how hungry they still were. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks up into the darkness. Somewhere in the jungle, something screamed, a high, eerie sound that made the hair on Nathan's arms stand up. "What the hell was that?" Elena asked, her voice tight. "I don't know. Monkey, maybe?" "Monkeys don't sound like that. You ever heard a monkey?" "No." "Then how do you know?" Elena didn't answer. She just pulled her knees up to her chest and stared into the fire, her arms wrapped around herself. Nathan added another log, building the flames higher. The jungle felt too close, too alive, pressing in from all sides. He didn't sleep much that night either. Every time he started to drift off, he'd jerk awake at some new sound, rustling, chittering, the distant crash of waves. His body ached everywhere. His ankle was a constant throb of pain. But worse than any of that was the gnawing fear in his gut, the one that whispered Ruby's name over and over until he wanted to scream. When the sun finally came up, Nathan stood and stretched, his joints cracking. Elena was already awake, sitting on the log with the notebook open in her lap, writing something. "What's that?" Nathan asked. "A plan," she said without looking up. "We need structure, routine, tasks. We're not running a business, Elena. No, we're trying to survive. Same principle." She tapped the pen against the paper. "We need fresh water every day. We need food. We need to maintain the fire, build a signal, improve our shelter. If we don't organize it, we'll waste energy going in circles." Nathan wanted to argue, but he couldn't. She was right. They needed a plan. "All right," he said. "What do you have so far?" Elena turned the notebook so he could see. She'd written out a schedule in neat handwriting: morning water run, midday foraging, afternoon signal work, evening fire maintenance. Underneath that, a list of priorities. Find more food sources. Build better shelter. Create signal visible from air and sea. Treat injuries. Inventory supplies weekly. "You did all this before sunrise?" Nathan asked. "I couldn't sleep." "Yeah, me neither." They spent the next week falling into the rhythm Elena had outlined. Every morning, they made the trek to the spring, filling their bottles and washing off the worst of the grime. Every afternoon, they scoured the beach and the jungle for anything edible. Coconuts were plentiful, but getting them down was a nightmare. Nathan tried climbing once and made it 3 feet before his ankle gave out, and he slid back down, scraping his palms raw. Elena tried next and managed slightly better, but the effort left her gray-faced and shaking. They finally figured out a system. Nathan would throw rocks at the coconuts until they fell, then Elena would crack them open with the multi-tool. It was inefficient and exhausting, but it worked. The coconut meat was bland and fibrous, but it was food. The water inside was sweet and clean. They found other things too. Some kind of berry growing on low bushes near the spring. Nathan tried one first, waiting an hour to see if he'd get sick. When he didn't, they picked as many as they could carry. Shellfish clinging to rocks in the tidal pools. A bird's nest with 3 eggs that Elena insisted they leave alone because they didn't know if the eggs were fertilized and she couldn't stomach the idea of eating a half-formed chick. Nathan didn't argue. He felt the same way. The signal fire was harder. They built it on the highest point they could reach without going too deep into the jungle, a rocky outcrop that jutted up from the beach, giving them a clear view of the ocean. They piled up driftwood, palm fronds, and anything else that would burn, then arranged pieces of metal from the plane to reflect sunlight. It wasn't much, but if a plane flew over, maybe someone would see it. Every night, Nathan lay awake and listened for the sound of engines. He never heard them. On the 8th day, Elena's leg got worse. Nathan noticed it first thing in the morning. She was sitting on the log, unwrapping the bandage, and when the fabric came away, the smell hit him like a punch to the gut. Rot. Infection. The wound was oozing greenish pus, and the red streaks had spread halfway up her thigh. "We need to clean that," Nathan said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I have been cleaning it. It's not enough." He grabbed the first aid kit and the water bottle. "We need to flush it out. This is going to hurt." "Everything hurts, Brooks. Just do it." He poured water over the wound, and Elena hissed through her teeth, her hands fisting in her torn pants. The water ran pink, then red, washing away the worst of the pus. Nathan used the tweezers to pick out bits of debris he'd missed before. Sand, fabric, something that might have been a splinter. Elena didn't make a sound, but her face went white, and sweat beaded on her forehead. When he was done, Nathan slathered the wound with antibiotic ointment and wrapped it with the last of their clean bandages. It wasn't enough. He could see that. The infection was spreading faster than they could fight it, and they were almost out of supplies. "You need antibiotics," Nathan said. "Real ones." "Well, unless there's a pharmacy hidden in the jungle, I'm out of luck." "This isn't a joke." "I know it's not." Elena's voice was flat. "But there's nothing we can do about it. So unless you want to spend the next hour panicking, let's just move on." Nathan wanted to shake her, wanted to yell at her for being so damn stubborn, for pretending like this wasn't serious, for acting like she could control her way out of an infection. But he didn't. He just packed up the first aid kit and stood. "We're finding more supplies today," he said. There has to be something in the wreckage we missed. They went back to the plane. It had been over a week, and the bodies they'd covered were starting to smell. Nathan tried not to look at them as he and Elena picked through the debris again, overturning seats and digging through luggage. They found a bottle of ibuprofen in someone's carry-on, a small sewing kit, a waterproof flashlight that still worked, and then Elena found the radio. It was buried under a section of the cockpit, half crushed but still intact. She pulled it out carefully, turning it over in her hands. It was old, an emergency radio, the kind pilots used to communicate with air traffic control. The casing was cracked, and the antenna was bent, but when Elena flipped the power switch, a faint static hiss came through the speaker. Nathan's heart leapt into his throat. "Does it work?" he asked. "I don't know." Elena turned the dial, and the static shifted, crackling and popping. "The battery's low, and I don't know if it's transmitting or just receiving. Can you fix it? I'm a CEO, not an engineer." "You went to MIT. Elena looked at him, surprised. "How do you know that?" "It was in your bio on the company website." Nathan crouched beside her, looking at the radio. "You studied electrical engineering before you switched to business. That was 15 years ago." "So?" She stared at the radio for a long moment, then let out a breath. "I'll try, but I need tools, wire, anything conductive." They spent the rest of the day scavenging. Nathan pulled apart seat frames for metal pieces. Elena stripped wires from the cockpit, testing each one to see if it still carried a charge. By the time the sun set, they had a small pile of parts spread out on the sand, and Elena was sitting cross-legged in front of the radio, her face set in concentration. Nathan watched her work. Her hands moved with a precision he hadn't expected, twisting wires together, soldering connections with a heated piece of metal from the fire. She didn't talk, didn't explain what she was doing. She just worked, and for the first time since the crash, Nathan saw a flicker of the person she must have been before all this, focused, brilliant, in control. It took her 3 hours. When she finally flipped the power switch again, the static was louder, clearer. Elena turned the dial slowly, listening. For a long time there was nothing, just white noise and the occasional burst of interference, and then faint and distant, a voice. "Coast Guard Station Honolulu, frequency 121.5, monitoring emergency channels. If anyone is receiving this transmission, please respond." Nathan's breath caught. Elena's hands were shaking as she grabbed the microphone, pressing the transmit button. "This is Elena Vale," she said, her voice cracking. "We're survivors of Flight 447. We're stranded on an island. Can you hear me? Please, can you hear me?" Static. Elena tried again. "This is Elena Vale. 2 survivors. We need help. Please respond." Nothing. She kept trying, over and over, her voice growing hoarse, her hands white-knuckled on the microphone. Nathan stood beside her, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. The voice didn't come back. After an hour, Elena set the microphone down and put her head in her hands. Her shoulders were shaking. "They didn't hear us," she said. "Maybe they did. Maybe the signal just didn't come through. Or maybe the radio's only receiving. Maybe we can hear them, but they can't hear us." Nathan didn't have an answer for that. He sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, and stared out at the ocean. The moon was rising, casting silver light across the water. It looked peaceful, beautiful even, like the world wasn't falling apart. "We'll try again tomorrow," Nathan said, "and the day after that. Every day until someone hears us." Elena didn't respond. She just sat there, her face hidden, her breathing uneven. And Nathan realized she was crying, quiet, broken sobs that she was trying desperately to muffle. He didn't say anything. He just stayed there, solid and present, until she finally pulled herself together and wiped her face with the back of her hand. "I'm not giving up," she said, her voice rough. "I know. I needed a minute. You can have as many minutes as you need." She looked at him then, her eyes red and swollen. "You're a good person, Brooks." Nathan didn't feel like a good person. He felt like a man who was failing his daughter, failing himself, failing at every promise he'd ever made. But he didn't say that. He just nodded. They sat together in the moonlight, 2 broken people pretending they weren't terrified, and listened to the ocean breathe. The storm hit on day 14. Nathan saw it coming that morning, a dark line on the horizon, bruise purple and spreading like spilled ink. The air had changed overnight, turning thick and electric, pressing down on his chest until every breath felt labored. The birds had gone quiet. Even the insects seemed to sense it, their constant buzzing fading to nothing. Elena was at the spring, refilling their bottles. Her leg was worse despite Nathan's efforts to keep it clean, and the fever had started 3 days ago. She tried to hide it, but Nathan could see the flush in her cheeks, the glassy look in her eyes. She moved slower now, wincing with every step, and twice he'd caught her leaning against a tree, breathing hard like she'd just run a mile. He found her sitting on a rock near the water, her head tipped back against the stone, eyes closed. The bottles lay beside her, only half filled. "We need to get back," Nathan said. "Storm's coming." Elena opened her eyes. "How bad?" "Bad enough. We should secure the shelter, bring everything inside." She nodded and stood, swaying slightly. Nathan caught her elbow. "I'm fine," she said automatically. "You're burning up." "It's just the heat." "Elena, I said I'm fine." She pulled away from him, grabbed the bottles, and started back toward camp. Nathan watched her go, frustration knotting in his chest. 2 weeks on this island, and she still couldn't admit when she needed help. Still couldn't let go of that iron control, even as her body fell apart. He followed her back through the jungle. The wind was picking up, bending the trees and sending leaves skittering across the ground. By the time they reached the clearing, the sky had turned the color of old bruises, and the first fat drops of rain were starting to fall. They worked fast. Nathan gathered everything they'd left scattered around the camp: the first aid kit, the multi-tool, the salvaged clothing they'd been using as bedding, and piled it under the crude lean-to they'd built against the fallen log. Elena dragged over the pieces of fuselage they'd been using as windbreaks, propping them up to create a makeshift roof. The rain was coming down harder now, cold and stinging, turning the dirt beneath their feet to mud. Thunder rumbled in the distance, low and threatening. "Get under the shelter," Nathan said, raising his voice over the wind. "The fire. Forget the fire. We'll rebuild it after." Elena hesitated, then ducked under the lean-to. Nathan followed, squeezing in beside her just as the sky opened up. The rain came down in sheets, so thick Nathan could barely see the beach 20 yards away. Lightning cracked overhead, brilliant white and jagged, followed by thunder that shook the ground. The shelter held. Barely. Water dripped through gaps in the fuselage, pooling on the ground beneath them, but the worst of the rain stayed outside. Nathan and Elena sat shoulder to shoulder, knees pulled up, watching the storm tear through the jungle like something alive and angry. "I've never seen rain like this," Elena said. Her voice was hoarse. "Tropical storm. Maybe a typhoon." Nathan wiped water off his face. "Could last hours. Maybe longer." "The signal fire. We'll wash out. Nothing we can do about it." Elena closed her eyes, and Nathan could see the exhaustion carved into every line of her face. She'd lost weight over the past 2 weeks. They both had, but it showed more on her. Her cheekbones stood out sharp, and the hollows under her eyes were deep enough to cast shadows. "You need to rest," Nathan said. "We need to rest, Elena, just for an hour. I'll keep watch." She looked like she wanted to argue, but another crack of thunder made her flinch, and she just nodded. She shifted, trying to get comfortable on the uneven ground, and Nathan pulled off his jacket, still damp but better than nothing, and handed it to her. "Use this." "You'll freeze." "I'll be fine." She took the jacket and bunched it up as a pillow, lying down with her back against the log. Within minutes, her breathing had evened out, her face relaxing into something that almost looked peaceful. Nathan watched her sleep and tried not to think about what would happen if the infection didn't get better. Tried not to think about being alone on this island with nothing but the wreckage and the ocean and his own spiraling thoughts. The storm raged for 6 hours. By the time it finally passed, the clearing was unrecognizable. The fire pit was a muddy crater. Their carefully organized supplies were scattered everywhere, soaked and filthy. One of the fuselage pieces had blown clear across the beach and now lay half buried in the surf. The lean-to had collapsed on one side, and water stood in puddles across the entire camp. Nathan crawled out from under the shelter, his whole body aching. The sky was clearing, patches of blue showing through the retreating clouds, but the damage was done. He looked at the wreckage of their camp and felt something close to despair settle in his chest. Elena emerged behind him, leaning heavily on a piece of driftwood she'd been using as a cane. She surveyed the destruction in silence. "Well," she said finally, "that's not ideal." Nathan almost laughed. Almost. "No, it's really not." They spent the rest of the day rebuilding. The signal fire was completely gone, every piece of wood waterlogged and useless. They'd have to start over from scratch, and that would take days. The supplies were salvageable, mostly, but everything needed to be dried out and reorganized. The shelter needed repairs. It was exhausting, soul-crushing work, and Nathan's ankle was screaming by the time the sun started to set. But they kept going because the alternative was giving up, and neither of them was ready for that yet. That night, they sat beside a new fire Nathan had managed to coax to life, using the last dry kindling from their emergency stash. Elena was shivering despite the heat, wrapped in a salvaged blanket that smelled like mildew and jet fuel. "How's your leg?" Nathan asked. "It's fine." "Elena," she sighed. "It hurts. A lot. And I think the fever's getting worse." Nathan reached over and pressed the back of his hand to her forehead. She was burning up, her skin dry and hot to the touch. "We need to try the radio again," he said. "Tomorrow. If someone hears us, if we can get coordinates to them." "The radio's been underwater for 6 hours, Brooks. It's dead." "We don't know that until we try." Elena didn't answer. She just stared into the fire, her jaw tight. After a moment, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared." Nathan looked at her, startled. In 2 weeks, he'd never heard her admit to being scared. Angry, yes, frustrated, exhausted, but never scared. "Of dying?" he asked. "Of not mattering." She pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "My whole life I built things. Companies, teams, systems. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I was smart enough, I'd leave something behind, something that mattered. And now I'm here, and none of that means anything. If I die on this island, all those years, all that work, it just disappears. Like I was never here at all." Nathan didn't know what to say. He thought about his own life, about the years he'd spent working at a job he didn't love because it paid well and kept Ruby fed, about the endless meetings and deadlines and performance reviews that had seemed so important at the time, about how none of it mattered now that he was here, thousands of miles from the only thing that actually did matter. "You pulled me out of a burning plane," Nathan said finally. "That matters. To you." "Yeah, to me." He poked at the fire with a stick. "And for what it's worth, I think you're wrong. About disappearing. My daughter, when I tell her about this, about you, she'll remember. That has to count for something." Elena looked at him, and for the first time since the crash, Nathan saw something break in her expression. Not tears, exactly. Something deeper, like a wall coming down. "Tell me about her," Elena said. "Ruby, tell me what she's like." So Nathan did. He told her about Ruby's terrible knock-knock jokes and her obsession with dinosaurs, about how she'd learned to ride a bike last summer and crashed into a mailbox on her first solo ride, about the way she sang in the shower, off-key and loud, and how she still slept with a stuffed elephant named Mr. Trunk, even though she insisted she was too old for stuffed animals. He told her about Sarah, too, about the cancer that came out of nowhere and took her in 6 months, about the last conversation they'd had when Sarah made him promise to take care of Ruby, to never let her forget how much she was loved. "I'm breaking that promise right now," Nathan said, his throat tight. "She thinks I'm dead. And even if we get rescued, even if I make it home, what do I tell her? How do I explain why I wasn't there?" "You tell her the truth," Elena said quietly. "That you fought like hell to get back to her. That you never stopped trying." Nathan nodded, not trusting himself to speak. They sat in silence after that, watching the fire burn low. The jungle around them was alive with the sounds of night, chirping, rustling, the distant crash of waves. But for once, it didn't feel threatening, just present. The next morning, Nathan checked the radio. Elena had been right. It was dead. Waterlogged and corroded, the circuits fried beyond repair. He spent an hour trying to salvage it anyway, taking it apart and laying the pieces out to dry, but he knew it was hopeless. "We'll build the signal fire bigger," he said when Elena asked. "Make it impossible to miss." "With what wood? Everything's still wet from the storm." "Then we'll wait for it to dry. We'll gather more." We'll figure it out. Elena looked at him like he was insane. You really think someone's looking for us? I have to. Why? Because if I don't, I'll lose my mind. Nathan set down the broken radio and turned to face her. I know the odds. I know it's been 2 weeks and we haven't seen a single plane. I know the chances of rescue are basically zero, but if I stop believing it's possible, if I give up, I'm done. So yeah, I'm going to keep building signal fires and checking the horizon and acting like someone's coming, because that's the only way I survive this. Elena stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay. 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 We'll build the biggest damn signal fire this island has ever seen. They spent the next 3 days gathering wood. It was brutal work. Nathan's ankle was barely functional, and Elena could hardly walk, but they dragged branches and logs and pieces of driftwood up to the rocky outcrop until they had a pile taller than either of them. They arranged it carefully, leaving gaps for airflow, and surrounded the base with the reflective metal pieces from the plane. On the 4th day, they lit it. The fire roared to life, flames leaping 20 feet into the air, smoke billowing up in a thick black column that could probably be seen for miles. Nathan and Elena stood at the edge of the outcrop, watching it burn, and for the first time in days, Nathan felt something like hope. If there's anyone out there, Elena said, they'll see this. Yeah, they kept the fire going all day, feeding it constantly, taking turns watching the sky. But the sky stayed empty. No planes, no helicopters, just endless blue stretching in every direction. By nightfall, they were both exhausted. Nathan's hands were blistered from handling wood, and Elena looked like she was about to collapse. They let the fire die down to coals and stumbled back to camp, where they fell asleep almost immediately. Nathan dreamed of Ruby. She was standing in his sister's driveway, holding Mr. Trunk, her face streaked with tears. She kept calling his name over and over, and Nathan tried to answer, but no sound came out. He woke up gasping, his heart pounding, and found Elena sitting up beside him, her hand on his shoulder. You okay? She asked. Yeah, bad dream. About Ruby? He nodded. Elena squeezed his shoulder once, then let go. She's tougher than you think. She'll be okay. Nathan wanted to believe her, but the fear was always there, gnawing at him, whispering that Ruby wouldn't be okay, that losing him would break her the way losing Sarah almost had. The days blurred together after that. They fell into a routine that felt less like survival and more like just existing. Wake up, check the signal fire. Gather water, scavenge for food. Tend to Elena's leg. Try the radio even though it was dead. Sleep, repeat. On day 21, everything changed. Nathan was down at the beach, searching the tidal pools for shellfish, when he heard it, a low, distant rumble that didn't sound like thunder. He straightened up, shading his eyes against the sun, and scanned the sky. There, a speck on the horizon, growing larger. A plane. Nathan's heart slammed into his ribs. He started running, ignoring the pain in his ankle, scrambling up the rocks toward the signal fire. Elena was already there, frantically feeding wood into the flames, sending up thick plumes of smoke. It's coming this way, she shouted. The plane was closer now, close enough that Nathan could make out the shape. A small commercial jet, probably a puddle jumper flying between islands. It was heading straight toward them, and for one wild, dizzying moment, Nathan thought they'd done it. They'd been seen. He waved his arms over his head, screaming at the top of his lungs, even though he knew the pilot couldn't hear him. Elena was doing the same, jumping up and down despite her injured leg, her face flushed with hope and desperation. The plane kept coming, and then it started to turn. No, Elena breathed. No, no, no. The plane banked left, changing course, and within seconds it was moving away from them. Nathan watched it go, his arms still raised, his throat raw from shouting. The sound of the engines faded, grew distant, disappeared entirely. The sky was empty again. Elena sank to her knees, her hands covering her face. Nathan stood frozen, staring at the empty horizon, and felt something inside him break. They'd been so close. The plane had been right there, maybe a mile away, and it had just turned, missed them completely. They didn't see us, Elena said, her voice muffled. We had the fire going, we had smoke, and they didn't see us. Nathan couldn't answer. He couldn't even move. The hope he'd been clinging to for 3 weeks was gone, ripped away in the space of 30 seconds, and what was left behind was hollow and aching. He sat down beside Elena on the rocks. Neither of them spoke. They just sat there as the signal fire burned itself out, as the sun crawled across the sky, as the reality of their situation settled over them like a weight. "We're not getting rescued," Elena said eventually. This time, Nathan didn't argue. That night, they didn't talk. They sat by the fire in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Nathan kept seeing the plane turning away, kept hearing the sound of the engines fading, kept thinking about Ruby and the promise he'd made her, the one he was never going to be able to keep. Elena's fever was worse. She'd stopped trying to hide it, and Nathan had stopped pretending he could fix it. The infection had spread halfway up her thigh now, angry red lines branching out like tree roots. She was weak, feverish, fading, and there was nothing he could do. "Brooks," Elena said suddenly. Her voice was thin, stretched tight. "If I don't make it, don't." "If I don't make it," she continued, "I need you to know something." Nathan looked at her. She was staring into the fire, her face gaunt and pale. "I'm glad it was you," she said. "Out of everyone on that plane, I'm glad it was you who survived with me. You're a good man, better than I deserved." "That's not true." "It is." She turned to look at him, and there were tears on her face. "I've spent my whole life pushing people away, building walls, pretending I didn't need anyone, and you didn't let me do that. You made me see that maybe I was wrong, so thank you." Nathan's throat closed up. He reached over and took her hand, and she gripped it tight, like she was holding on to the last solid thing in the world. "You're not going to die," Nathan said. "I won't let you." Elena smiled, sad and tired. "I don't think you get a vote, Brooks." But she was wrong, because the next morning, when Nathan checked her leg, something had changed. The redness had stopped spreading. The swelling had gone down. Her fever had broken sometime in the night, and when she woke up, her eyes were clearer than they'd been in days. "I feel better," she said, surprised. Nathan didn't let himself believe it at first, but as the day went on, it became obvious. Elena's body had finally won the fight against the infection. She was still weak, still in pain, but she was getting better. "You're too stubborn to die," Nathan said, relief flooding through him. Elena laughed, a real laugh, the first he'd heard from her. "Yeah, I guess I am." They spent the rest of the day rebuilding. Not the signal fire, they both knew now that it was useless, but themselves. They ate a full meal for the first time in days. They washed in the spring and changed Elena's bandages with the last of their supplies. They talked about what came next, about how to make this survival thing last longer than a few more weeks. "We need a better shelter," Elena said. "Something that'll hold up in another storm." "Agreed, and we need to find more food sources. We can't live on coconuts and shellfish forever." "Fishing. We could make a spear, try to catch something in the shallows." Nathan nodded. "I'll start on that tomorrow." It wasn't hope exactly. It was something smaller, more fragile, but it was enough. That night, Nathan lay awake listening to the jungle and thought about the plane that had passed them by, thought about how close they'd come to rescue and how far they still were from home, thought about Ruby and whether she'd given up on him yet. But for the first time since the crash, he didn't feel like he was drowning. The island was still brutal, still unforgiving. But he wasn't alone. And as long as Elena was beside him, fighting just as hard as he was, maybe, just maybe, they could survive this after all. The shark appeared on day 28. Nathan was standing waist-deep in the water, holding the makeshift spear he'd carved from a sturdy branch, when he saw the fin cutting through the shallows about 30 feet out. His entire body went cold. The spear suddenly felt like a toothpick in his hands. "Elena," he called, keeping his voice level. "I need you to stay on the beach." She was sitting on a rock, soaking her leg in the salt water like he'd told her to. The infection was gone, but the wound was still healing, and the salt helped keep it clean. She looked up at his tone. "What's wrong?" "Just stay there." The shark circled closer. Nathan could see it clearly now, maybe 6 feet long, gray and sleek, moving with the kind of lazy confidence that came from being the apex predator. It wasn't huge, but it was big enough. And Nathan was standing in its hunting ground with nothing but a pointed stick. He started backing toward shore, slow and steady, trying not to splash. His heart was hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. The shark followed, tracking his movement. 10 feet from shore. 8, 6. The shark turned and swam away. Nathan scrambled out of the water so fast he nearly fell, his legs shaking. Elena was already on her feet, limping toward him. Was that? Yeah. Are you okay? Nathan nodded, even though he wasn't sure. His hands were trembling, and the spear slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the rocks. He sat down hard, trying to catch his breath. So fishing in the shallows is out, Elena said. Unless you want to be bait, yeah. She sat beside him, her shoulder pressing against his. They'd gotten comfortable with that over the past few weeks. Casual touches, sitting close, the kind of physical proximity that came from being the only two people in the world. It didn't mean anything. It was just survival. We need food, Elena said. The coconuts aren't enough. We're both losing weight. She wasn't wrong. Nathan had lost at least 20 pounds, maybe more. His clothes hung loose on his frame, and he could count his ribs through his shirt. Elena was even thinner, her face all sharp angles and hollow spaces. We'll set traps, Nathan said. Try to catch birds or whatever else is in the jungle. With what? I don't know. We'll figure it out. Elena looked at him, her expression unreadable. You always say that. Say what? We'll figure it out. Like it's a fact instead of a hope. Would you rather I say we're screwed? I'd rather you be honest. Nathan picked up the spear and turned it over in his hands. The tip was already dull from scraping against rocks. Fine. Honestly, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm making this up as I go, and half the time I'm terrified it's all going to fall apart. But if I stop pretending I know what I'm doing, if I let myself think about how bad this actually is, I'll break. So yeah, I say we'll figure it out. Because the alternative is giving up, and I'm not ready for that yet. Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Okay. 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 Keep saying it. I'll keep believing it. Nathan looked at her and saw something he hadn't seen before. Trust. Real trust. Not the uneasy alliance they'd started with. She was counting on him, and somehow that made the weight on his shoulders feel both heavier and lighter at the same time. They spent the afternoon building traps. Nathan used vines and branches to construct crude snares, placing them along the animal trails he'd noticed in the jungle. Elena wove baskets from palm fronds, cursing under her breath when the leaves split or refused to cooperate. Her hands were blistered and raw by the time she finished, but she had 3 passable baskets to show for it. Not bad, Nathan said, examining one. They're terrible. They'll hold food, that's all that matters. That night, they checked the traps and found nothing. The next night, same result. On the 3rd night, one of the snares had caught a bird, small and scrawny, barely worth the effort of plucking and cooking. But it was meat, and when Nathan roasted it over the fire, the smell alone made his mouth water. They split it between them. Nathan gave Elena the bigger half, and she didn't argue. The meat was tough and gamey, but it was the best thing Nathan had tasted in a month. We need to check the traps twice a day, Elena said, licking grease off her fingers. Maximize our chances. Agreed. And we should explore more of the island. There might be fruit trees inland, or... She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes going wide. Nathan followed her gaze and saw it too. Movement in the jungle just beyond the firelight. Something big, shifting between the trees. Nathan grabbed the spear. Stay behind me. What is it? I don't know. The thing moved closer, and Nathan's grip on the spear tightened. He could hear it now, heavy footsteps, branches snapping. His mind raced through possibilities. Wild boar? Some kind of big cat? He didn't know what lived on these islands, but whatever it was coming straight toward them. Then it stepped into the light. A wild pig. Massive, easily 200 pounds, with tusks that curved up from its jaw like knives. It stared at them with small, dark eyes, snorting steam into the cool night air. Don't move, Nathan whispered. The pig lowered its head, pawing at the ground. Nathan knew that posture. He'd seen it on nature documentaries right before the animal charged. Nathan, don't move! The pig charged. Nathan barely had time to brace himself before the animal slammed into him like a freight train. The spear flew from his hands, and he hit the ground hard, the pig's weight crushing the air from his lungs. He felt something sharp graze his ribs, hot and searing, and then Elena was there, screaming and swinging a burning branch from the fire. The pig wheeled around, confused, and Elena jabbed the burning end at its face. It squealed and bolted back into the jungle, crashing through the undergrowth until the sound faded to nothing. Nathan lay on his back, gasping. His side was on fire. When he pressed his hand to it, his fingers came away wet with blood. "How bad is it?" Elena asked, dropping to her knees beside him. "I don't know." She pulled up his shirt, and he heard her sharp intake of breath. "It's not deep, just a graze, but it's bleeding a lot." Nathan tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain shot through his ribs, and his vision went spotty. "Don't move," Elena said. She grabbed the first aid kit, now almost empty, and started cleaning the wound with water. Her hands were steady despite the terror still etched on her face. "You're an idiot. You know that?" "Yeah, I got that impression." "Standing in front of a charging boar with a stick. What were you thinking?" "I was thinking I didn't want it to kill you." Elena paused, her hands still on his ribs. She looked at him, and something passed between them, something unspoken but heavy. Then she went back to work, wrapping his torso with the last of their bandages. "Well," she said, her voice rough. "Thanks for not dying." "Any time." The wound healed slowly. Nathan couldn't do much for the next few days except sit by the fire and try not to move too quickly. Elena took over the heavy work, checking traps, gathering water, maintaining the shelter. She didn't complain, but Nathan could see the exhaustion piling up on her. Her limp was back, and she was favoring her bad leg more than she had in a week. "You need to rest," Nathan said one afternoon. "So do you." "I got gored by a pig. What's your excuse?" Elena sat down beside him, groaning as she stretched out her leg. "My excuse is that I'm tired of this island. I'm tired of being dirty and hungry and scared. I'm tired of not knowing if we're going to make it through another week." Nathan didn't have an answer for that. He was tired too, bone-deep tired, the kind that sleep couldn't fix. "Tell me something," Elena said. "Something from before. From your real life." "Like what?" "I don't know. Anything. A good memory." Nathan thought about it. Ruby's 5th birthday. Sarah was already sick, but she was having a good day. We threw this party in our backyard. Nothing fancy, just cupcakes and balloons and a couple of Ruby's friends from preschool. Sarah spent the whole afternoon sitting in a lawn chair watching Ruby run around, and she was smiling, really smiling, not the fake kind she did when she was in pain. And at the end of the day, after everyone left, Ruby climbed into her lap and fell asleep, just curled up like a cat and passed out. And Sarah looked at me and said, "This is enough. This right here." Nathan's throat tightened. I didn't know what she meant at the time, but I get it now. She meant that moment, that one perfect afternoon. It was worth everything. All the pain, all the fear. As long as she had that, she could let go of the rest. Elena was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "I don't have memories like that." "Sure you do." "No, I really don't." She picked at a loose thread on her torn pants. "I spent my 20s building my career. 80-hour weeks, no vacations, no relationships that lasted longer than a few months. I told myself it was worth it, that once I made it to the top, once I had the corner office and the 7-figure salary, I'd slow down, enjoy life. But I never did. I just kept working, and now I'm here, and I can't remember the last time I was actually happy. That's not true." "It is." Elena looked at him, her eyes bright. "I don't have a Ruby. I don't have a Sarah. I don't even have friends. Not real ones. Just people I do business with. And when I die, whether it's on this island or 50 years from now, there won't be anyone who remembers me the way you remember them." Nathan reached over and took her hand. "I'll remember you. You barely knew me before this. I know you now, and that counts for something." Elena's fingers tightened around his. "You're a better person than I am, Brooks." "I'm really not." "Yeah, you are." They sat like that for a while, hands linked, watching the fire. And Nathan realized something he hadn't let himself think about before. He cared about Elena. Not as a boss or a coworker, or even just a fellow survivor. He cared about her as a person, as someone who mattered. The realization scared him more than the shark or the boar or any of the other dangers they'd faced. On day 35, they found the cave. They'd been exploring the interior of the island, looking for new food sources, when they stumbled across a rocky hillside covered in thick vegetation. Elena pushed aside a curtain of vines, and behind it was an opening, dark and narrow, leading into the rock. "Should we go in?" she asked. Nathan peered into the darkness. "Could be dangerous." could also be useful. Shelter from storms, storage. She had a point. Nathan grabbed the flashlight they'd salvaged from the wreckage. The battery was dying, but it still worked, and stepped inside. The cave was bigger than he'd expected. The ceiling was high enough to stand in, and the space opened up into a chamber about the size of his old living room. The floor was dry, and there were no signs of animals living there. No droppings, no nests, no bones. "This is perfect," Elena said, her voice echoing off the stone. "We could move the camp here. It's protected. It's dry." "It's inland," Nathan interrupted. "Away from the beach. If a rescue team comes—" "No one's coming, Nathan." The words hung in the air between them. Nathan wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she was wrong, that they just had to wait a little longer. But he couldn't, because deep down he knew she was right. "We'll keep the signal fire going," he said finally, "but we'll move camp here. Make this our base." Elena nodded. "Okay, let's do it." Moving camp took 3 days. They hauled everything from the beach to the cave: supplies, firewood, the makeshift furniture they'd built. Nathan's ribs screamed with every trip, but he pushed through it. By the time they were done, the cave actually felt like a home. They had a fire pit near the entrance for ventilation, sleeping areas on opposite sides for privacy, and storage for their dwindling supplies. It was still a cave on a deserted island, but it was theirs. That night, they sat by the fire and ate roasted fish that Elena had managed to catch using a net they'd woven from vines. It was small and bony, but it was food. "Not bad," Nathan said. "Don't get used to it. That took me 4 hours." "Still, you did good." Elena smiled, and Nathan realized how rare that was, how much he'd started to notice it when it happened. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said. "Sure. When you think about going home, if we ever get off this island, what's the first thing you'll do?" Nathan didn't even have to think about it. "Hold my daughter. Just hold her and not let go." "And after that?" "I don't know. Pizza, probably. Ruby loves pizza." Elena laughed. "That's your second priority? Pizza? You clearly haven't had good pizza." "I've had amazing pizza. I just wouldn't put it above, I don't know, a hot shower." "Okay, fine. Hot shower, then pizza." They went back and forth like that, listing all the things they missed from the real world. Hot water, clean clothes, air conditioning, beds with actual mattresses, coffee, the internet, movies, music. Nathan realized halfway through that he was smiling, that Elena was smiling, that for the first time in over a month, they weren't just surviving, they were living. The moment didn't last. On day 40, the animals came. Nathan woke in the middle of the night to the sound of something moving outside the cave. Not the usual jungle noises. This was different, deliberate. He grabbed the spear and crept to the entrance, his heart pounding. In the moonlight, he could see them. Wild pigs, at least half a dozen, rooting through their supplies. One of them had knocked over their water storage, spilling precious fresh water onto the ground. Another was tearing apart the baskets Elena had worked so hard to make. "Hey!" Nathan shouted, banging the spear against the rock. "Get out of here!" The pigs scattered, but not far. They regrouped about 20 feet away, watching him with those small, intelligent eyes. Waiting. Elena appeared beside him, holding a burning branch. "What the hell?" "They're after our food." "Well, they can't have it." She hurled the branch at the nearest pig. It squealed and backed up, but the others didn't move. They just stood there staring. Nathan and Elena spent the rest of the night taking shifts, guarding the cave entrance. Every time they started to relax, the pigs would edge closer, testing them. It was exhausting and terrifying and infuriating all at once. When the sun finally came up, the pigs disappeared back into the jungle, but the damage was done. Half their food was gone. The water was spilled, and Nathan knew with sickening certainty that the pigs would be back. "We need to build a barrier," Elena said. Her voice was flat with exhaustion. "Something to keep them out." They spent the day constructing a crude fence across the cave entrance using branches and vines. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. That night the pigs returned and the barrier held. Barely. The animals threw themselves against it, grunting and squealing, but they couldn't break through. Nathan sat with his back against the wall, gripping the spear, listening to the sounds of the pigs trying to get in. Beside him, Elena was doing the same, her face pale in the firelight. "This island is trying to kill us," she said. Yeah. And we're going to die here. Nathan looked at her. No, we're not. How can you still believe that? Because I have to. Because if I don't... He stopped, swallowing hard. If I don't, then what was the point of any of this? What was the point of surviving the crash, of fighting through the infection, of building this whole life here? It has to mean something, Elena. It has to. Elena's eyes were wet. What if it doesn't? Then we make it mean something. She stared at him for a long moment. Then she reached over and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. And they sat like that, holding on to each other, while the pigs screamed outside and the fire burned low. The attacks continued for a week. Every night, the pigs came back. Every night, Nathan and Elena fought them off. They were running out of supplies, running out of energy, running out of hope. Nathan's ribs ached constantly. Elena's leg was swelling again. They were both on the edge of breaking. And then, on the 8th night, the pigs didn't come. Nathan and Elena sat by the fire, waiting, listening. But the jungle was quiet. No grunting, no rustling, nothing. Maybe they gave up, Elena said. Maybe. They didn't let their guard down. But as the hours passed and the pigs didn't return, something loosened in Nathan's chest. They'd survived. Again. The next morning, they ventured out to check the traps, and in one of them, impossibly, was a pig. A young one, maybe 60 pounds, caught by the leg in the snare Nathan had built weeks ago and forgotten about. Nathan stared at it. Then he started laughing, wild, half-hysterical laughter that he couldn't control. Elena looked at him like he'd lost his mind. We've been fighting them off for a week, Nathan gasped between laughs. And the whole time, we had one caught in a trap. Elena's mouth twitched. Then she started laughing too. And for a moment, standing in the jungle with nothing but each other and a trapped pig, they forgot how scared they were. They forgot how hopeless it all seemed. They just laughed. They butchered the pig that afternoon. It was messy, brutal work, and neither of them really knew what they were doing. But by the time they were done, they had meat. Real meat. Enough to last them a week if they rationed it carefully. That night, they feasted. They cooked the pork over the fire until it was charred on the outside and tender on the inside, and they ate until they couldn't eat anymore. It was the first time in 40 days that Nathan felt truly full. This is the best meal I've ever had, Elena said, grease on her chin. Better than fancy CEO dinners? Better than anything. Nathan believed her. They sat by the fire, watching the stars come out one by one, and for the first time since the crash, Nathan felt something other than fear or exhaustion or despair. He felt grateful. Grateful to be alive. Grateful for the food in his stomach. Grateful for the woman sitting beside him who'd become more than just his boss or his survival partner. She'd become his friend. Nathan, Elena said quietly. Yeah? If we get off this island, when we get off this island, I don't want to go back to the way things were before. What do you mean? She turned to look at him, her face serious. I mean the person I was before the crash. She was lonely, miserable, successful, maybe, but empty. And I don't want to be her anymore. I want to be someone better. Someone who actually gives a damn about the people around her. Nathan nodded. I get that. Do you? Yeah, I do. He poked at the fire with a stick. I spent 3 years just going through the motions. Working a job I didn't care about. Coming home to an empty house, pretending I was okay. And I wasn't. I was barely holding it together. But here, he gestured around the cave. Here I can't pretend. I have to face everything head on. And maybe that's not such a bad thing. Elena reached over and squeezed his hand. We're going to make it, Brooks. We're going to get off this island, and we're going to go home, and we're going to be better than we were. Nathan wanted to believe her, and for the first time in a long time, he almost did. The radio crackled to life on day 53. Nathan was outside the cave, checking the rebuilt signal fire, when he heard Elena shout his name. Not the calm, controlled voice she usually used. This was raw and urgent, cutting through the jungle noise like a knife. He ran back to the cave, his heart in his throat, expecting the worst. But Elena wasn't hurt. She was kneeling beside the broken radio they'd abandoned weeks ago, holding the microphone with shaking hands. It's working, she said. Nathan, it's working. He dropped to his knees beside her. The radio was still crackling with static, but underneath it, faint and distant, was a voice. a human voice that wasn't theirs. All vessels, this is Coast Guard Station Honolulu on emergency frequency 121.5. If you are receiving this transmission, Elena pressed the transmit button. This is Elena Vale. We're survivors from Flight 447, 2 of us. We've been stranded for 53 days. Can you hear me? Static. She tried again, her voice breaking. Please, if anyone can hear this, we're on an island in the Pacific. We need help. Nothing. Nathan took the microphone from her. This is Nathan Brooks. We're alive. We're on an island. We don't know exactly where, but we crashed in the Pacific on March 12th. Flight 447 from Seattle to Sydney. Please respond. They waited. The static hissed and popped, meaningless white noise that stretched seconds into hours. Elena's hands were fisted in her lap, her knuckles white. And then, impossibly, a voice cut through the interference. Flight 447, this is Coast Guard Station Honolulu. We copy your transmission. Can you provide your current location? Elena made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Nathan grabbed her hand and squeezed it so hard his fingers hurt. We don't know our exact coordinates, Nathan said into the microphone. The plane broke apart during the crash. We've been on this island since March 12th. There are 2 survivors, Elena Vale and Nathan Brooks. Copy that. Stand by. The radio went silent except for the static. Nathan and Elena stared at each other, afraid to breathe, afraid to believe this was real. We did it, Elena whispered. They heard us. They heard us, Nathan repeated, and the words felt like they might choke him. The voice came back. Flight 447, we're going to need more information to locate you. Can you describe your surroundings? Any landmarks, geographical features? Nathan and Elena spent the next hour describing everything they could remember from the crash and everything they'd learned about the island. The rocky outcrop, the freshwater spring, the jungle, the cave, the pieces of the plane still scattered on the beach. The Coast Guard operator, a woman with a calm, professional voice, took it all down, asking questions, narrowing their location. We're going to start a search pattern based on your last known position, the operator said. It may take some time, but we will find you. In the meantime, keep your signal fire burning. If you can create any kind of visible marker on the beach, something large enough to see from the air, that would help. We will, Nathan said. We'll do whatever you need. Stay strong. Help is coming. The transmission ended. Nathan set down the microphone and looked at Elena. Her face was wet with tears she wasn't bothering to wipe away, and he realized his face was too. They're coming, she said. Yeah. After 53 days, they're actually coming. Nathan pulled her into a hug, sudden and fierce and desperate, and Elena wrapped her arms around him and held on like she was drowning. They stayed like that for a long time, neither of them speaking, both of them shaking with relief and fear and something too big to name. When they finally pulled apart, Elena's eyes were red but clear. We need to build that marker, make ourselves impossible to miss. They worked like people possessed. Nathan hauled every piece of metal from the wreckage he could find, dragging it across the sand and arranging it in the largest SOS pattern he could manage. Elena gathered palm fronds and set them in piles around the perimeter, ready to burn. They built the signal fire higher than it had ever been, feeding it until the flames roared and the smoke poured into the sky in a thick black column. By nightfall, they had transformed the beach into a beacon. The SOS gleamed in the fading light, visible from any angle. The fire blazed like a warning. If a plane came anywhere near this island, they would see it. Nathan collapsed onto the sand, his chest heaving. His ribs throbbed, his ankle ached, and every muscle in his body screamed for rest. But he'd never felt more alive. Elena sat beside him, staring out at the ocean. What if they don't find us? They will. But what if they don't? What if we got our hopes up for nothing? Nathan turned to look at her. Then we keep going, same as we've been doing, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think this time we actually get to go home. Elena nodded, but she didn't look convinced. And Nathan understood. Hope was dangerous. It left you vulnerable in a way that fear never did. Giving up on rescue had been painful, but it was safe. Believing in it again meant opening yourself up to the possibility of having it ripped away. That night, neither of them slept. They sat by the fire, taking turns checking the radio, listening for any sign that the Coast Guard was still looking. The hours crawled by, each one heavier than the last, And then, just before dawn, they heard it. The distant thrum of helicopter rotors. Nathan was on his feet before his brain caught up with his body, scanning the sky. There, a black shape silhouetted against the gray pre-dawn light, growing larger by the second. "Elena!" he shouted. "They're here!" She scrambled up beside him, and together they grabbed the palm fronds and threw them onto the signal fire. The flames exploded, sending up a wall of heat and light. Nathan waved his arms over his head, screaming at the top of his lungs, even though he knew the helicopter crew couldn't hear him. The helicopter circled once, low and slow, and Nathan could see the searchlight sweeping across the beach. It found them, pinning them in a cone of brilliant white light, and Nathan felt his knees buckle with relief. The helicopter didn't land. The beach was too narrow, too cluttered with debris. Instead, it hovered about 50 feet up, and a figure appeared in the open door. A rescue swimmer, descending on a cable, dropping toward them like something out of a dream. He hit the ground running, unhooking himself from the cable and jogging toward them. He was young, maybe mid-20s, with the kind of competent calm that came from training and experience. "Elena Vale? Nathan Brooks?" "That's us," Nathan managed. "I'm Petty Officer Martinez with the Coast Guard. We're here to get you out." He looked them over quickly, assessing. "Can you both walk?" "Yes," Elena said, even though Nathan knew her leg was killing her. "Good. We're going to harness you up one at a time and lift you into the bird. Miss Vale, you're first." Elena hesitated, looking at Nathan. "Go," he said. "I'll be right behind you." Martinez worked fast, strapping Elena into a harness and signaling the helicopter. The cable descended again, and Martinez clipped her in. She looked terrified as she lifted off the ground, rising into the air in jerky increments, but she didn't scream. She just kept her eyes locked on Nathan until the helicopter swallowed her up. Then it was Nathan's turn. The harness felt strange and tight around his chest, pressing against his healing ribs. The ground dropped away beneath him, and for a sickening moment he was suspended in midair with nothing but a thin cable between him and a 50-foot fall. But then hands were grabbing him, pulling him into the helicopter, and he was inside, safe and real and rescued. Elena was sitting against the far wall, wrapped in a silver thermal blanket, and when she saw him, she started crying again. Nathan crawled over to her and pulled her into another hug, and this time neither of them let go. The helicopter banked hard, turning away from the island. Nathan looked out the open door and saw the beach shrinking below them. The wreckage, the signal fire, the cave hidden in the jungle. 53 days of their lives, disappearing into the distance. And then it was gone. The flight to the Coast Guard station took 2 hours. Nathan and Elena sat wrapped in blankets, drinking water a medic handed them in small, careful sips. Neither of them could stop shaking. The medic checked them over, asking questions about injuries and medical history, but his voice seemed to come from very far away. Nathan couldn't focus on anything except the fact that he was in a helicopter, flying over open water, heading toward civilization. Heading home. When they landed, there were people everywhere. Medics, Coast Guard personnel, someone with a camera. Nathan was separated from Elena almost immediately, guided into an ambulance while she was taken to another. He tried to protest, but exhaustion hit him like a freight train, and he couldn't find the words. The hospital was chaos. Doctors, nurses, bright lights, machines beeping. They cleaned his wounds, x-rayed his ribs and ankle, hooked him up to an IV. Someone told him he was severely dehydrated and malnourished, but otherwise stable. Someone else asked him questions about the crash, about the island, about how they'd survived. Nathan answered on autopilot, his mind numb. And then, finally, they left him alone in a quiet room with white walls and clean sheets, and Nathan broke down. He cried for Ruby, who he thought he'd never see again. He cried for Sarah, who hadn't gotten the chance to be rescued. He cried for Elena and for himself and for the 53 days they'd spent clinging to life by their fingernails. He cried until there was nothing left, and then he fell asleep. When he woke up, his sister was sitting beside the bed. "Hey," she said softly. Nathan stared at her. "Jenna?" "Yeah, it's me." Her eyes were red and puffy. "They called me as soon as you were stable. I got on the first flight out." "Ruby, she's okay. She's with Mom and Dad. I didn't bring her because I didn't know—" Jenna's voice broke. "We thought you were dead, Nathan. They told us the plane went down and there were no survivors, and we had a funeral and everything. Ruby cried for weeks. We all did. Nathan closed his eyes. I'm sorry. Don't you dare apologize. Jenna grabbed his hand. You survived. You made it back. That's all that matters. When can I see her? Tomorrow. The doctors want to keep you overnight for observation, but tomorrow you can see her. Jenna squeezed his hand. She's so excited, Nathan. She can't stop talking about it, about you coming home. Nathan's chest felt too tight to breathe. I kept my promise. What? I told her I'd come home, and I did. Jenna started crying, and Nathan let her. He didn't have any tears left. The next day, they released him from the hospital with a list of follow-up appointments and a warning to take it easy. Nathan ignored the warning. He could barely walk in a straight line, but the moment he was cleared to leave, he was moving. Jenna drove him to her house, talking the whole way about Ruby and how much she'd changed in the last 2 months and how brave she'd been through everything. Nathan listened, but he couldn't focus. His entire world had narrowed to a single point, seeing his daughter again. When they pulled into the driveway, Ruby was already on the porch. She must have been watching for them, because the moment the car stopped, she was running, flying down the steps and across the lawn, her face streaked with tears. Nathan got out of the car just in time to catch her. She hit him like a missile, wrapping her arms around his waist and burying her face in his stomach. She was crying so hard she couldn't speak, just making these broken, gasping sounds that tore Nathan's heart into pieces. I'm here, he said, his own voice shaking. I'm here, Ruby. I'm so sorry. I'm here. You promised, she sobbed. You promised you'd come back. I know, and I did. I came back. He sank down onto the grass, pulling her into his lap, and she clung to him like she was afraid he'd disappear if she let go. Nathan held her and rocked her and whispered every reassurance he could think of until her sobs finally quieted into hiccups. When she pulled back to look at him, her face was blotchy and wet, but she was smiling. You look different. I lost some weight. You look like a pirate. Nathan laughed, actually laughed, and it felt like something breaking open in his chest. Yeah? Yeah, a skinny pirate. She touched his face like she needed to make sure he was real. Are you okay? I am now. They stayed like that for a long time, sitting in the grass while Jenna and their parents watched from the porch. And Nathan realized something he'd forgotten during the 53 days on the island. This was what mattered. Not work or money or status. Just this. Being here with the people who loved him, who'd waited for him, who'd never stopped believing he'd come home. He saw Elena 3 days later. She'd been released from the hospital the same day he was, but they hadn't talked since the rescue. Nathan had thought about calling her a dozen times, but he didn't know what to say. What do you say to someone who saved your life and then lived through hell beside you? Thank you felt inadequate. I miss you felt too honest. But she called him first. Brooks, she said when he answered. It's me. Hey. Hey. A pause. How are you? Good. Tired. Still getting used to beds and running water. Nathan leaned against the kitchen counter. You? Same. My assistant cried when she saw me. I've never seen Rachel cry before. It was disturbing. Nathan smiled. I bet. Another pause, longer this time. Then Elena said, I'm going back to work next week. Doctor's orders were to take a month off, but I'll go insane if I sit around doing nothing. Yeah, that sounds like you. I wanted to... She stopped and Nathan heard her take a breath. I wanted to see you before everything goes back to normal, if that's okay. Of course it's okay. They met at a coffee shop near Nathan's sister's house. Elena was already there when he arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups in front of her. She looked different in real clothes, a sweater and jeans instead of torn business attire, her hair clean and pulled back. But her face was still gaunt, her eyes still haunted. I ordered you a coffee, she said as he sat down. I didn't know what you liked, so I guessed. Thanks. Nathan took a sip. It was terrible, too sweet, too much cream, but it was the best thing he'd ever tasted. They sat in awkward silence for a moment. Then Elena said, This is weird, right? So weird. I don't know how to do this, how to talk to you when we're not trying to survive. Nathan set down his coffee. Then let's not make it complicated. Let's just talk. So they did. They talked about the island and the rescue and the media circus that had erupted when news of the survivors broke. They talked about their families, their jobs, their plans for the future. And slowly, the awkwardness faded, replaced by the same easy companionship they'd found in the cave. "I meant what I said on the island," Elena said eventually. "About not going back to the way things were. I'm making changes, real ones." "Like what?" "I promoted Rachel to VP. She's been covering for me for years, and she deserves it. I'm cutting my hours, delegating more. And I'm selling the penthouse." Nathan raised his eyebrows. "The penthouse you bought 2 years ago?" "Yeah, it's too big, too empty. I'm getting something smaller, something that feels like a home instead of a hotel." She looked at him. "What about you?" Nathan thought about the job offer his old company had extended. Same position, same salary, a generous bonus for the trauma he'd endured. He'd turned it down yesterday. "I'm starting my own thing," he said. "Consulting for nonprofits. Crisis management, organizational rebuilding. I figure if I can survive a plane crash and 53 days on an island, I can help people navigate their disasters." Elena smiled. "That's perfect for you." "Maybe. We'll see." He paused. "I also talked to a therapist. For Ruby and for me. We both need help processing this." "That's good. Smart." "What about you? Are you talking to anyone?" Elena looked down at her coffee. "I have an appointment next week. I've never done therapy before. It feels vulnerable." "Yeah, it is, but that's not a bad thing." She nodded slowly. "I'm learning that." They talked for another hour until the coffee shop started filling up with the lunch crowd. When they finally stood to leave, Elena hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "Do you think we'll stay in touch? Or will this just be, I don't know, a weird chapter we both move on from?" Nathan looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the fear underneath the question. The same fear he'd been carrying, that this connection they'd built, this bond forged in fire and desperation, would fade now that they were back in the real world. "We'll stay in touch," he said. "I'm not letting you disappear, Elena. You're stuck with me." Relief flooded her face. "Good, because you're stuck with me too." They hugged goodbye, and it felt different from the desperate embraces on the island. This one was lighter, easier, but no less real. Over the following months, Nathan rebuilt his life piece by piece. He moved back into his own house with Ruby, and together they created new routines and new memories. Ruby had nightmares sometimes, waking up crying because she dreamed he was gone again. Nathan would sit with her until she fell back asleep, and in the morning they'd talk about it with the therapist who was helping them both heal. Nathan's consulting business took off faster than he'd expected. Turns out surviving the impossible made for a compelling resume. He worked with disaster relief organizations, helped companies rebuild after crises, and found a sense of purpose he'd been missing for years. Elena kept her promises too. She restructured her company, promoted people who deserved it, and started actually leaving the office before midnight. She and Nathan met for coffee every few weeks, and slowly, those meetings turned into dinners. Then dinners turned into weekend hikes. Then Elena started coming to Ruby's soccer games, cheering from the sidelines like she'd been there all along. Ruby adored her. She called Elena Ms. Vale at first, formal and shy, but eventually it became just Elena. And when Elena showed up at Ruby's 9th birthday party with a ridiculously oversized stuffed dinosaur, Ruby hugged her so tight Elena's eyes went misty. "You're part of our family now," Ruby told her seriously. "Dad said so." Elena looked at Nathan, who shrugged. "I might have said something like that." "Well," Elena said, kneeling down to Ruby's level, "I'd be honored to be part of your family." Nathan watched them together and felt something settle in his chest, something that had been fractured and broken for a long time. A year after the rescue, Nathan and Elena were invited to speak at a conference about crisis survival and resilience. They almost didn't go. Neither of them liked the idea of turning their trauma into a spectacle, but the organizers promised it would be about helping others, about sharing what they'd learned. They stood on stage together in front of hundreds of people and told their story. Not the sanitized version the media had reported, but the real one. The fear and the hunger and the moments when they'd almost given up. The infections and the storms and the wild pigs, the radio that finally worked, the helicopter that brought them home. During the Q&A, Someone asked what the most important lesson from the island was. Elena answered first. That control is an illusion. I spent my whole life trying to manage every variable, predict every outcome. And then the plane went down, and none of that mattered. The island taught me that sometimes you have to let go and just trust the people around you. Nathan nodded. For me, it was about what really matters. I was so focused on work, on keeping busy, on making sure Ruby had everything she needed materially. But what she needed was me, present and whole, not just going through the motions. The island stripped everything else away until that was the only thing left. Another person asked if they'd stay friends. Nathan and Elena looked at each other and smiled. We're not just friends, Elena said. We're family. That doesn't go away. After the conference, they walked through the city together, neither of them ready to say goodbye. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded Nathan of the island's sunsets. But this time, he wasn't looking at them with fear or despair, just gratitude. I've been thinking, Elena said, about starting a foundation, something focused on helping plane crash survivors and their families, counseling, financial support, community building. That's a great idea. I want you to help me run it. Nathan stopped walking. What? You're good at this, Nathan, helping people through trauma, rebuilding after disasters, and you understand what it's like in a way most people don't. She looked at him. I can't do it alone. I don't want to do it alone. Nathan thought about it, thought about Ruby and his consulting work and the life he'd built, thought about the promise he'd made on the island to be better, to do better. Okay, he said, let's do it. Elena grinned, a real full smile that transformed her entire face. Yeah? Yeah, but I have one condition. What's that? Ruby gets to design the logo. She's really into art right now. Elena laughed. Deal. They shook on it, and Nathan felt like something had come full circle. They'd survived the worst thing imaginable, and instead of letting it break them, they were using it to build something better. That night, Nathan went home and tucked Ruby into bed. She was getting too old for it, almost 10 now, but she still let him read her a story and kiss her forehead. Dad? She said as he was turning off the light. Yeah? Are you happy? The question surprised him. What makes you ask that? You smile more now, and you don't look sad all the time like you used to. She rolled over to face him. I think you're happier. Nathan thought about it, thought about the island and the crash and the 53 days he'd spent thinking he'd never see her again. Thought about Elena and the foundation they were building and the life he'd created on the other side of disaster. Yeah, he said. I am happy. Happier than I've been in a long time. Good, Ruby yawned. I like you better this way. Me too, kiddo, me too. Me? Nathan turned off the light and stood in the doorway for a moment, watching his daughter fall asleep. And he thought about Sarah, about the promise he'd made her to take care of Ruby and never let her forget she was loved. He'd kept that promise, even when it seemed impossible, even when the whole world fell apart. The island had taken a lot from him. Time, weight, pieces of himself he'd never get back. But it had also given him something unexpected. Clarity, purpose, a second chance at a life that actually meant something. He closed Ruby's door and walked to the kitchen, where his phone was buzzing with a text from Elena. Just a photo of her with Rachel at the office, both of them making ridiculous faces at the camera. He smiled and sent back a thumbs up. Looking back, Nathan understood that survival wasn't about making it through the crash or the 53 days on the island. It was about what you did with the life you got back, how you honored the second chance you'd been given, how you let yourself be changed by the experience instead of running from it. He'd survived the island, but more importantly, he'd survived what came after. The grief and the fear and the slow, painful work of becoming someone better. Someone who showed up. Someone who let people in. Someone who understood that life was too short to waste on things that didn't matter. And in the end, that was the real rescue. Not the helicopter or the Coast Guard or the flight home. It was the choice to live fully in the life he'd fought so hard to keep. To be present for his daughter, to build something meaningful with Elena, to stop hiding behind work and routine and fear. The plane crash had tried to kill him. The island had tried to break him. But he'd made it through both, and what was left was a man who knew what mattered, who'd learned the hard way that connection and love and showing up for the people who needed you That was everything. That was enough. That was more than enough. Nathan poured himself a glass of water and stood by the window, looking out at the ordinary suburban street where he lived his ordinary, extraordinary life. And he felt something he hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. Peace. He'd kept his promise to Ruby. He'd found his way home. And he'd brought back something more valuable than survival. He'd brought back himself.